want to welcome everybody that might be joining us in this recording of another monthly GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe. We've got a small group here, so we're going to have some really deep, intimate conversation. I started saying I don't have an agenda. I've got a fallback agenda that we can look at, some things that we can talk about, but I'd kind of like to pursue some things that we were talking about before we hit the record button. Before we actually do that, to officially get us started, let me ask Les Cool, if you will, to lead us in a word of prayer to get started.
Sure. Let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the technology that the four of us and any others that would join us can, from our little corners of the world, can gather to chat. We've been talking about interpersonal relationships and structure, and we're going to look for you to allow your Spirit to guide our conversation. We're looking to learn from one another, to improve how we serve others. But along the way, boy, it'd be great to catch glimpses of the wonder of you in the midst of the conversation. So we pray to those ends in Jesus' name. Amen.
Before we hit the record button, we were talking a little bit about how sometimes there can be a toxicity that gets into a group. It might be because of a leader that is not being attentive to the needs of the people he's leading, and they might begin to become hurt or even bitter about that. And we were also talking a little bit about how there are some times when, from a leader's perspective, there are team members who can become toxic, that can be contaminating the group. And that can lead to the unpleasant need to separate, to part ways, but how difficult that is. And what I'd like to kind of draw our focus to is how that is relevant to GRIP-Birkman in terms of how we might use our not just the assessments, but our skills as coaches and our desire to be building unity in the body of Christ. When we come across that in our coaching, how do we approach it? Give you a quick bad example. An early group that I was coaching was with a church staff. The pastor invited me to come with his senior staff. There were 10 people in the room. He was super excited about GRIP-Birkman. Loved what he was seeing in himself and how he was being able to see the rest of his team. And at the very first break, on the very first morning, he came up to me and he said, "This is great. Now I know exactly why I need to fire 2 of my team members." And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're missing the point here already. And the rest of my time was spent every break trying to convince him that he had a stewardship responsibility to try and mentor these people, to encourage them, to look at their strengths and see how they could fit in the team. And if it came to the point that they really needed to separate, that was something that ought to happen later on. But, let's give unity a chance to even start here. So there was one extreme. And then we've got the other extreme of some people that are reluctant to ever deal with the problems that their teams are facing. So we wait until things get really, really bad and we have collateral damage because we haven't addressed it soon enough. So with that little kindling, perhaps, to get the fire started, guys, what do you think about this? Michael, you mentioned earlier about those 3 attitudes or 3 positions that people might have within the organization. Why don't you repeat those for us again and see if that helps to focus us?
Well, talking about the way that Gallup classifies employees in terms of either engaged, disengaged, or actively disengaged. The actively disengaged folks are the ones that hate their job, don't want to be there. They're toxic and they're pulling everybody else down with them. They're sabotaging the company or the organization. And they don't have the initiative to go and improve their own situation by getting a better job. So, until you get rid of them, they're just hanging around there. And so it's the actively disengaged people that you can't move the needle on. They need to go. the only hope that you have is to be able to move the needle on people that are disengaged and get them back into engaged again. But you're also talking. It's interesting about how GRIP-Birkman fits in, and kind of that aha moment that you described about the guy saying, "Well, I need to fire 2 people," and it just makes me wonder, if part of that aha moment is going, "Oh, wait a minute! I've been trying to hammer nails with a pipe wrench." Like I've got the wrong tools in place, or I'm not using the right tools for the right job. And, it's not necessarily, do I need to discard these people or get rid of them, but maybe I got them in the wrong role. Maybe I need the right person in the right role. So maybe it's a skills mismatch, or an overall, misalignment where there really isn't the right fit for that person in that particular role. Or maybe it's just a personality difference. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe I just don't know what this person needs to be able to operate in their strengths. And that's where I need to come alongside in a way of understanding them better to give them what they need to succeed in that role. So it's hard to say really where the disconnect or the problem is in that particular example that you gave. But, there's 2 different ways of looking at it. It could just be completely the wrong fit, the wrong person in the wrong role. And maybe we find the right place to put them, and then we find the right person to replace them. Or we just find a way to help them actually succeed in that role. So it's hard to say exactly what the answer is in that situation.
Well, in that particular case, my attitude toward it was, hey, you've got some guys that may not be doing the job the way you think they ought to be doing it, or they may not be performing up to your expectations. Have you clearly communicated those expectations to them? And if you're looking at their levels of development, one of them was a fairly young guy. Does he just need some mentoring? A little bit of, hey, let's get together once a week and let's talk about what you're doing, and let me give you some guidance. Let me give you some things to read. Let me give you some assignments. Any number of things that he could do to mentor the guy along. It seems to me that would have been a course to take before you came to the action of, this just isn't working out. Let's just get rid of the guy. And so what you're saying could very well have been true. There could be some mismatch. There could have been some interests that weren't being addressed for those guys. There might have been another position. One of them might have just needed a little bit of encouragement, that if he got a couple of words of encouragement, he'd get his mojo back, but he was feeling unappreciated. Yeah. So what was that,
Larry, question back to your original story here. How did you personally process the feelings you had when they just fired that guy?
He didn't.
I know just a short time ago, I did a team build for a staff at a church, 23 staff members. And the walk away, the lead pastor fired somebody the following week. And I was just devastated that was the walk away. And I think it negatively impacted my next couple of team builds, because in the back of my head, I was like, who's going to lose their job because of this one? I was wondering about that.
Yeah. I mean, I was able to convince him to hold off for a while. I couldn't get him to set up weekly meetings with those guys to have, to coach them or to mentor them or to see where they were going along. I felt like I was failing at that because I could not convince him of the value. And I really had trouble convincing him of the stewardship concept. In fact, that experience has influenced me to put more emphasis on the word of stewardship in relationship to the relations that we have. The stewardship of relationships is so important. where we look and say, but this is the team that for whatever reasons God has given you right now. You have a stewardship responsibility to try and make the best of these, and you don't want to be like the guy that just buried his two in the ground and didn't have any return on it. So yeah, he did wait for a while, but within, I guess, I don't know, 6 months, when he contacted me, and let me know, well, he finally got rid of those guys. But guess what? One of them did not go quietly. He gathered his supporters around him, and it became quite a mess. And within, I guess, less than 18 months, the pastor was no longer there either.
Yeah.
So that, wasn't, it just wasn't a pretty sight. The funny thing is, one of those guys who got fired saw me at a meeting a couple of years later, and he said, "Hey, are you still doing that GRIP-Birkman stuff?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "That was the best thing ever, man. You think you could come do it at my church with the church where I'm working now?"
There you go.
So I felt a little redemption there.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of trepidation. That same church, one of the ministry departments has invited me back. They just hired some people, and I'm going to do a team build with the new department. And so in the back of my head, I'm like, sure, I'll do that. Yeah.
Hey, Les Bernard, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm good. I think like it's been intimated in some of our conversation, I think the developmental responsibility in this kind of conversation is high on the part of the supervisor. And when I say developmental responsibility, it's not only kind of assessing where the individual's at, but helping them develop a plan for movement and then providing feedback with respect to what kind of progress is or isn't being made, right? And I think that's not necessarily a GRIP-Birkman element, but it is a fundamental element to working with your teams. I look at it from, like, maybe the simplest way I look at it is if you had a four-quadrant graph where the x-axis is competency and the y-axis, the vertical axis, is commitment to vision, then you can actually plot where people are fairly quickly. If on the left side of that x-axis there's high competency, and then it moves towards the right to low competency, and then the bottom is low commitment to the vision, and the top of the axis is high commitment to the vision, you find out where people are very quickly. Obviously, the sweet spot is where they've got high competency and they've got a high commitment to the vision. If you move over from the first quadrant to the second quadrant, then you've got somebody who's got a commitment to the vision, but they've got low competency. So that's just a training and resourcing, in all likelihood, right? It's the bottom two quadrants where you find yourself in trouble, because in the fourth quadrant, that one down in the far right corner, they have low competency and they have a low commitment to the vision, which means you should have never hired the person in the first place, right? Like that was a bad hire. Probably the most challenging person for you in your organization is the person that's in the bottom quadrant, because they have high competency, but low commitment to the vision. So actually, through their competence, they're pulling people away from alignment. And so that ends up being a really challenging situation. You have to find a way with that person to quickly determine whether or not they can buy in the vision. And if they can, then you've got somebody that's moved from quadrant 3 to quadrant 1, which is fantastic. And if they're not prepared to buy in vision, that person ends up having a fairly destructive influence, because they're actually contributing to misalignment instead of helping move things forward, right? So probably the people that we're talking about the most are the quadrant 2 people. These are people, they've got a fairly high commitment to the vision. They're just not that competent in whatever they're doing. So that's a developmental conversation now. And if the movement can happen, that's great. If the movement can't happen, that's when you start to talk about whether or not that individual needs to move out. But I think often there isn't a lot of on the part of the supervisor to accurately assessing where this person is and how they need to see movement and what's the plan for that movement. Because most people want to be in a place where they fit, right? Yeah. That's my assumption. So that's kind of the baseline way I look at it, and then from there, building those developmental plans. See, are they teachable? Are they responding? Are we making progress? You can move somebody through a developmental path into becoming an extremely high contributor to your organization, and your investment in them actually reaps all kinds of benefits in addition to competency, because you're building relational capital, you're building trust, all of those things that ultimately end up being real wins for you.
Yeah. And how do you get that to the win? How can we draw GRIP-Birkman into this? What place does it have?
Well, I think it's got a great place in terms of not only the initial kind of self-awareness that is developed on the part of the individual. This is, if you think about a Birkman standpoint, you've got all kinds of things that are learnings. I think every time I have a conversation with somebody, there's the learnings around what people see, don't see, and some of the things that I need to learn how to communicate, and the whole idea of using strength as an indicator instead of something that is my primary focus. And then on the GRIP side, you got an unbelievable sense of, this is my contribution, this is what I need, building that sense of interdependency. Those things are all fantastic. And I think they set the stage for kind of wholesome conversation that is going to be part of that developmental path for somebody, for sure. And may actually have something to do with the rubs that are taking place too, because not all the rubs necessarily fit into what I talked about in terms of commitment to the vision and competence. Sometimes you've got rubs that are generated out of not understanding interdependency, or not understanding their makeup or the makeup of the people that they're working with, and that just creates friction. And friction causes heat, and heat causes, so it just ends up being this difficult cycle.
Yeah, and as you're speaking there, Les, it makes me think also the Birkman is a tool for helping to build emotional intelligence.
Yeah, totally.
And so when we can help the person increase their own self-awareness, their self-maintenance even with that, and then, okay, how does it help them with their social awareness in terms of being able to see other people? And those two key areas in emotional intelligence are some things that Birkman can help with. And of course, the GRIP side of it also, when we're looking particularly at team roles, team styles and bodybuilding roles.
Yeah.
How those play in. So, I like what you said also, the whole thinking about things of commitment to the vision and competency. We come back to the thing that we've mentioned before about how many times we make the mistake of making assignments to people based on their past performance and not looking at their interests or their strengths or their gifts. And it is so easy to pile more things on the people who are doing. So we give more tasks, say to that red kind of thing, you're already doing this, so let's just give you more to do. Or you've got that blue creativity. So, you're the creative person, let's just give you more to do with that. We see you cranking stuff out. Or, the yellow administrator, you put together a good manual for us, so let's give you another manual. But we may be missing the fact that there are other people who may have some of those potential strengths that we have not seen yet because we haven't explored their interests or their gifts with.
Yeah, and I think that's the responsibility of the supervisor with that individual. I did a team build recently with a team, and the individual that was their administrator, her interest All of her blue interests were in the 90s. So here we have this administrator who's a very competent administrator who, in terms of her interests, is phenomenally creative and needs to find ways to have expression for that. And so she's a volunteer worship leader, she's all those kinds of things. But I asked the team, I said, so here you've got this person here who's got lots of game, she contributes in a powerful way, and yet now you see her interest lying so much in this creative bent. How could that become an additional focus and strength for her, even within her role on your team?
Mm-hmm.
And it just led to this incredible conversation about different ways that she could be invited in to contribute they would have never thought of before, because they had her kind of pigeonholed as the administrator. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, with the interest, I think there's a misunderstanding by some team leaders. They assume interest, and it's an understanding thing, but they assume interest is equated with the ability or capacity to learn, the ability to do. And sometimes people have a skill set that they can use, but you have to help them figure out how to balance the work piece with expressing their interest someplace else or alongside of that.
Yeah.
You know, that's a terrible blunder for a leader to think, oh, he's interested in this, so we're gonna give him a job doing that. It may not be what he's capable of doing, and then that becomes a really bad match.
Yeah, unless you give him the training that he needs, you help him to develop the skill.
Yeah, I mean, and some people don't have the capacity to learn certain things. I've worked with two men now that were called to pastoral ministry,
Mm-hmm.
but what they were called to were the public pieces of ministry that look like fun.
Yeah.
You know, and I had one guy, I actually had him shadow me. He lasted one day, follow me around. He says, I don't want to do that stuff. And I said, this is most of what I do. You know,
I thought it was just going to be standing up on the pulpit and talking for 30 minutes once a week, right?
Yeah, going golfing. You know, he thought, I don't know, maybe lunches, but he just, yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing. Like, for example, we see a lot of people with high musical interests. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to make them the worship leader in the church or give them a task as, you know, the children's choir director just because they have a high musical interest. Mm-hmm. So we do have to explore that more with them of what does that mean for you? For those people that need to have music in their life, they really don't want to have a career as a musician.
Yeah.
So
it goes the other way around.
Yeah.
My interest in numbers is a 5. My skill in numbers is like 105. and so the only reason I do numbers is because I have to, or my 4th grade class that I tutor in at the elementary school around the corner here, I help them learn math. But my investment is in the kids.
Yeah.
And so I put up with the numbers to help the kids. And so sometimes you can violate the interest because the skill overlaps a passion. But we can't go the other way. We can't take that interest and assume it's an ability. And that's the part, I think, where we really hurt people when we don't help them separate those out.
Wow, yeah.
Where you have to rely somewhat on your conversations with the team leader too. Like in my case, it was easy because I know the team and I know the team members, and I know that those high blue interests actually correlate into passion and skill. She's a very gifted, creative person. So it was easy for me to ask the questions around how can that express itself on your team as opposed to only being an outside expression, because there were probably ways in that team for that expression to come out that would have amplified and been an enhancement for the team. But you're absolutely right, Les. There'd be lots of times when you wouldn't know that, and it would require a lot more curiosity to kind of figure out whether or not there was something to pursue there.
Yeah. And good coaching questions would pull that out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then how does the person's gifts play into that?
Gifts are where we're powerful.
Yeah.
When we're engaging the activity or the event in God's power. Now, we know the negative side of it if we just do it at our own strength. But overlapping here, and we're making an assumption, I guess, that this is some kind of spiritual environment. Not everybody I'm coaching or using the material with is a Christian environment. I've already crossed over that line. So, but if it's there, then we're looking for not only where can I do stuff, but where can I do stuff that God's empowered me to do. And so that's where we bring in the GRIP piece to it. But I've got a couple clients now, they're not interested in the GRIP, they're just interested in the Birkman.
Right.
And so that's a different beast that we play with there.
Yeah.
And even if you just had access to the Birkman, obviously we're talking about interests, but interests need to be looked at in light of the broader profile in terms of the usual style, the needs, stress, and all the rest of that. So you get a better sense even in that context if you don't have access to the GRIP.
Yeah. Now I'm running into some similar things here, Les, and that might be something for us to explore a little bit more too. I have some Christian business people that I'm coaching. But the coaching for warning is not in the context of the church. And the question that is starting to come up is, so how do their gifts play into that in their everyday life and not just their body life? Not just the gathered church, but as part of the scattered church. And, saying, hey, do I check my gifts at the door when I leave the church context, or do my gifts go with me into my business dealings? And if so, what role do they play? So how are you dealing with that when you're dealing with your people? And Les, Bernard, you're dealing with a whole lot of volunteers with the people that you're coaching. Are they getting any transfer from this into their work life?
Yeah, I think like the initial thought I have about what you're saying is that the amplifying factor that your gifts, when overlaid over the burden, have on your usual style doesn't have to be only limited to a Christian environment. So if you have, say, the gift of exhortation or the gift of leadership, that gift can function in any given environment, and that gift still has the impact of amplifying and moving your usual style. And that would be true for any of them, I think, right? So if there are going to be some that an individual may feel have a more active role in their non-church encounters, I think I would always encourage somebody to recognize that God gifted them. That giftedness can manifest itself in any setting.
And not only manifest, it can enhance the setting.
Oh, totally.
I had one young woman who is in industry, and she did the GRIP-Birkman with me. And through our coaching session, walking through it, she kept going, well, and this is where that gift plays in my office. This is where that, and she was recognizing that being empowered by God was actually making her workplace a better place.
Yeah.
Even though she couldn't talk about God at the workplace, just being Christ-like.
Yeah, totally.
Michael, you've recently been through coach training. How are you seeing this as a transfer into, let's call it into the secular world that we live?
Can you ask that one more time?
Well, I mean, the question I'm asking is how do our gifts play out in the workplace when we might be focusing on the Birkman part, but the gifts are still there if we're not checking them at the door. I just wanted to see if you had any other insights about how my gifts are at play when I'm not in the Christian environment. Particularly working in team, working, in that other community.
Well, first of all, I think that there's a real advantage, or a real it's very helpful anytime you have a greater awareness of being able to recognize not only your strengths but other people's strengths, understanding that whole part about what you need around you, kind of a thing, because in the corporate world that I'm from, people will look at maybe Myers-Briggs or DISC. They'll look at StrengthsFinder and that sort of thing, and it's all about the I, right, more than the we.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always found it helpful to be able to go, oh, you're like this. And so because I recognize that you're like this, I should approach you like this in order to be more effective with my communication. So, if we can help people through GRIP-Birkman to develop a greater awareness, who maybe have no other exposure to personality assessments or gifting type of things, I think that we're definitely helping them to not only know about themselves, but to understand other people. And that's going to translate in the workplace. That's going to play out in the workplace just as much as it would anywhere else. And so that's kind of my first thought about one of the benefits that people can gain from that. But the fact of your spiritual and your natural gifts coming together, even in the workplace, it's going to have an effect on the people that you work with, because anytime that you have a high enough understanding and you're actually in alignment with some kind of a role that is aligned with GRIP-Birkman, even if the role itself is on the secular natural side of things, it's when you are in a high degree of alignment, you're in a high degree of effectiveness, which means that you're going to be successful, which means that you're going to have a testimony to your boss and to your coworkers, because people see how well you're doing in this role because you're being successful because of that alignment. And so I think that anytime you are operating in your strengths, it's going to give you the opportunity to let your light shine in any context or environment that you happen to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just bringing up the dotted diamond illustration. Let me share that. Let me share with you this screen real quick, and tell me if you can see the dotted diamond in the map there.
Yeah.
Recently, I've been trying to help some people see how, as I'm explaining the dotted diamond and how your effective usual style can move someplace else than where it might be on the Birkman map because of the gifts at work in you. Try to explain that. People still get confused by the fans. The range of potential movement, and I keep emphasizing that it's not that it moves totally within that range, it's that potentially it could be in this general range, moving from wherever your diamond actually is. Recently, I've had a few people that have had some aha moments when they have finally caught on to that. A couple of people have been questioning what's the science behind this, and I said, no, don't try to scientificate it. We did look at a lot of profiles of people with a lot of questions, interviews with folks, talking about their ministry, getting anecdotal information, and pulling all that together to say, so where does your gift tend to pull you? And with the definitions of the gifts as well, when I say, hey, we need to go back and we need to find those definitions to be able to really see where is this thing at work. Why does evangelism pull up to extroversion and potentially over to task? Why doesn't evangelism pull over to people? Why can leadership pull toward people sometimes and toward tasks sometimes, but always toward extroversion? Why does administration only pull down toward the yellow quadrant? And so talking through all of those definitions of the gifts seems to help with that and helping them to plot that. But what you've been talking about there, Les, particularly with the enhancement lesson and well, all you guys talking about the enhancement of the gifts, talking about where does my gift carry me? One of the things that I have found helpful with this is to say, listen, think about a specific situation that you've been in, where the only way you could explain how you were effective in carrying out a specific assignment or task is that it had to be the gift at work in you. In your natural personality, you would not have felt comfortable. You were drawn out of your natural comfort zone to be effective in doing something that you cannot explain in any other way except that it had to be the power of the Spirit working in you through your gift. And that seems to be helping a few people when they can verbalize, okay, let's talk about this situation here, where this particular gift was at work, and then try to expand that to say, but wait a minute, there was a combination of your gifts at work. Let's look at your whole combination. How did one gift perhaps pull you in one direction and another gift may have pulled you up or down in another direction? Have you guys had any similar experiences with that?
Yeah, my experience in talking with people about a diamond has been that once they understand the rationale behind it, it does actually make sense for them.
Yeah.
And they can I tend to use their specific information, and typically that resonates with them. So I think, and that's where I think back to the conversation about in the marketplace, wherever, the reality is that movement is happening. If you have the gift of leadership and your diamond is in a particular place, you recognize that there's movement available there because of the Spirit at work in you that is not confined to just your spiritual activity in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think what that does is, like Michael said, ends up you're now experiencing that power. There's often fruit attached to that. People notice that. And I think, they're not going to be able to give credit to what they're just going to say, oh, he's a great leader, or, he's a man, can that guy ever listen? And, whatever, they're going to just do that. But that's God at work in you. And there may be opportunities for testimony around that and all the rest of it. But I would never encourage somebody to think of this in a compartmental way and only think of it within the context of, say, church or ministry, because I don't think that's a fair interpretation of the idea of giftedness or even of how our personality plays itself out.
Yeah, one of the things and now I look for things, but in restaurants, I watch management in restaurants, and I'm wondering sometimes, and I don't know them, but I wonder if their supporting gifts, if they were believers, if they were empowered by Christ, helps, mercy, and service, that they're capable of doing something maybe that's not their natural wiring, because they're the boss, they get things done. But you just watch some of these people, like a couple days ago, I was at a restaurant and a waitress dumped, I'm guessing it was $150 worth of food on the floor. And the floor manager just came over and swooped her right off the floor. And he had his arm around her shoulder, and he was just, it's okay. I could hear part of the conversation as they walked away. And he was being merciful and ministering. And somebody else came up and swept up, and they just went on. And he came out to the table, talked to the people that lost their food, said, it's going to be a bit, we're going to replace this. He gave them free desserts, I guess it was. But, in my head, I'm thinking, is that his wiring? Or did he become something because he's empowered in a different way? And I think we're going to see some of this as we start playing with this with different people, that especially the ones that who know that they know Christ and are empowered, get to do things that are not them in the midst of doing the things that they know they do. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, I don't know if this guy was a believer or whether he was a merciful person, but it was just this amazing scene in a restaurant that could have just gone sideways and been really ugly. And she was back out on the floor before Carol and I left the restaurant, and she was fine. But it was beautiful to watch.
I remember having a Jewish neighbor who commented to me one time about my interaction with my sons, about amazed at how patient I was with them. And I thought, I don't really feel that patient with my kids. But there was a fruit of the Spirit that was coming out. Patience is part of the fruit of the Spirit. And I was able to say, well, if I'm allowing the Spirit to work in me, then maybe, I said, I've got to tell you, this is not in me. It's not my natural person. It's got to be by the grace of God and the Spirit working in me that gives me the ability to exhibit some patience that really isn't mine. And it did allow for quite a conversation. In fact, he invited us over for dinner, and he had bacon and pork on the grill. Pork and bacon. He says, I'd love to invite you guys over because I love this stuff, and I have an excuse to cook it.
That's awesome.
Gentiles over, and I don't get to do that unless I bring Gentiles over. So it was an interesting. He was an interesting guy, but he was watching us constantly, and I needed the evidence of the Spirit to be in me in that setting. And I can think of some work settings also when I was working in a secular job, how that would play out. So anybody else have any other thoughts or comments that spring off of this? Or any other challenges you're facing?
Well, just to close the loop here, I think these different examples speak to me about our ability to influence culture, the culture of whatever place it is where we happen to be.
Yeah.
And whether that be only within the functioning of personality and our knowledge of who we are and what we bring, or as believers, obviously for us as believers, knowing that we have this really powerful overlay as the Spirit of God comes upon us, providing us with gifts, producing fruit, all of those things. Those things actually have the capacity to influence the culture of where we are, regardless of whether anybody else there believes in those or not. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree, Les. I was just thinking, those first disciples that Jesus called out, not one of them was a natural leader, as we would have thought of leaders. A couple of them may have been businessmen, and they may have had some employees on their fishing boats or something. You know, one guy had dealings as tax collector. He may have had some other people that were responsible to him, but they don't seem to have been leader types as we would ordinarily identify leader types. But wow, what the Spirit did to those guys to transform them was pretty amazing. And talk about having an impact on their culture and on global culture ultimately, because of allowing the Spirit to work through them, was pretty powerful, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And here we are approaching the top of the hour again, guys. So I hope this.
So I know we only have a couple of minutes left.
Go ahead, Michael.
And you know, maybe Larry, you want to parking lot this even for the leadership team to be pondering as well. But going back full circle to the very beginning of this conversation, it felt like one of the questions that was being asked was, you know, what do you do when people take the information from GRIP-Birkman and realize that there's a bad fit here, or determine that somebody needs to be removed?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting, because I feel like everything in life is about relationships, and you know, we can put this within the context of work relationships or ministry relationships, and you know, by relationships I also mean teams, right? Partnerships or teams. But it's interesting because I know that John Blake has actually used GRIP-Birkman for like premarital counseling. And I can't help but to think too that, like, you know, someone could just as easily come to a conclusion based on the evidence of GRIP-Birkman that, you know, maybe I married the wrong person, you know? It's just like maybe I hired the wrong person, you know, and what do you do with that? You know, what do you do? Is it really, I mean, are there times when it makes more sense to part ways? Are there certain contexts in which, you know, maybe there's a certain protocol that should be pursued along those lines? But it's just interesting because, like, you know, part of the essence of GRIP-Birkman is moving from I to we. But what do you do when people take the information and go, I think we need to move from we back to I again, or something like that? You know, it's something that I think we definitely want to be looking at under the microscope a little bit, because I think it is a reality that inevitably there are going to be situations in which people realize this isn't a great fit. And the question will always be, you know, can you make it work? How do you make it work? Or is it best to part ways?
Or when is the time to say, this just isn't working?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we do need to look more closely at how we help people without placement. And sometimes that is the best choice, when you realize that you are not in the place where you can feel that you are a good fit and you can flourish in this job. We talk about fit and flourish a lot. But what about when you say, this just does not seem to be the right fit? Can we help people to make good, healthy, positive choices to part company on good terms? And can we even, you know, celebrate that, to say, hey, you know what? This isn't the right place for you. What can we do to help you get in the right place?
And then even to take that one step further, the takeaway that a manager or somebody who made perhaps the wrong hiring decision, like, what did they learn from that?
Yeah.
And how do they leverage that learning to make a better or more accurate hiring decision, knowing what they know today and having the tool that they have, or the awareness around what GRIP-Birkman is showing them, so that they are making hiring decisions and choosing the right people in the right roles on their team.
Wow, that's something we do need to pursue some more, isn't it? So let's put that on a parking lot, but keep it up, Michael. Keep it close, front and foremost before us, front and center, so that we can talk about how do we as GRIP-Birkman coaches coach those leaders through those difficult decisions that have to be made sometimes, so that we won't get to the state of disease, toxicity that can poison not just the two individuals that might be involved, between the manager and the individual that really needs to move on, but everybody else in their environment that can be affected by this. So let's pursue this some more, give it some more thought. We may try to send the word out and give people some warning, maybe even a few things to read on this to prepare for another discussion, if that sounds good to you. Well, by mine, we're at the top of the hour here, guys. Your presence and discussions always stimulate me, and I always get copious notes from this that influence my future coaching. I hope it's beneficial to you. And to those of you that might be watching us with the recording as well, thank you for joining us. We opened with Les Cool praying for us. Les Van Bernard, why don't you pray for us, please, to sign us off?
Piece of cake. Father, thanks for a great conversation. Thank you that it's really true that like iron sharpens iron, we have that capacity to be sharpening, influencing each other's lives. And I'm thankful for these men and opportunity that we've had today to have this conversation, and for some of the insights that have been gained and some of the questions that are still lingering. Pray that in the days ahead you'll help us to think those things through, and that have an impact on how we interact with other people when it comes to the GRIP-Birkman as one of the tools that we use. Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for the things that are before us. Some of them we know, some of them we don't know. But we go into it trusting you to fill us with your spirit and to lead and guide us every step. And we just trust you for that. Thank you for this opportunity to be together. Amen.
Thanks, guys. And we hope we are going to see everybody at the Team of Teams meeting up close to you. Well, not closer to you less than we are from now, at least in your same class, right?
That's it.
Yeah. Is that say the name of the camp again?
It's Nakaman.
Nakaman?
Nakaman, yeah.
It's
a nice facility, a great spot. I think it'll be a great place for that kind of gathering and for that kind of work. I think it'll be excellent.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, where we'll be talking about actively engaging, Michael.
Yeah.
We want people to be actively engaged in this one.
Yeah.
We're moving forward to the future for GRIP-Birkman. They're likely to see the first snows on the ground, I guess, at that time.
That's possible, yeah.
It'll be a great setting, so hope to see all of you there. Meanwhile, I hope that you and all of us will just keep doing everything we can to help build unity in the body of Christ so more people will know Jesus.
Right.
Amen. Take care.
Bye, everyone.